James 1:19 tells us, "Let every person be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger." We're living in a day and an age when conversation, real conversation, is becoming a lost art. We actually tend to be the opposite of what Scripture says. We tend to be slow to speak, slow to listen, quick to speak, and easily offended. Failure to listen, joined with being easily offended, makes our society a much coarser place. There's 4 types of conversations I want us to look at. First one is what I'm going to call the "I must win" conversation. As this is the most common type of conversation I'm seeing in our society, and especially on social media today. This is where I'm going to tell you why I'm right, I expect you to agree, then I win. Or it's just going to be an endless debate. The next kind of conversation is, I want to impress you. Now, in the "I want to impress you" type of conversation, I'm not really listening. I'm just thinking about what the next thing I'm going to say. The third type of conversation is the "gotcha" type, where I'm just waiting for you to say something wrong so I can jump on you and let others know how evil you are, how bad you are, and how you are not to be trusted. But then there's the fourth type of conversation, which is the quick to listen type. In the quick to listen type conversation, I'm looking at you and I'm saying, you might have something useful for me to know. I may disagree with 90% of what you have to say, but there might be that one thing that you can say that's going to be worth my time. There are pitfalls to listening. You might tell me a lot of things I just don't like. You might even offend me. You may tell me something that's just difficult to hear, something that is like, okay, I really didn't want to hear that. But without risks, there is no conversation. So we have to be aware of the pitfalls and be willing to accept them. Now, there are rewards to being quick to listen. Being quick to listen gets you inside the other person's head, and that's a good place to be. It's good for both of you as long as you're a trusted resource. Also, one thing I've found that when you really listen to people, they start opening up their heart. They start entrusting information to you. See, people are so burdened with life. If they sense that you are truly listening and that you're someone that they can trust, they may tell you things that are unexpected. But how do you do it? How can you be quick to listen? First of all, each one of us, every time a person comes to me, then there are certain assumptions that pop into my head. There are certain things about that person, maybe their physical appearance, the way they walk, and I start making judgments. And that's not bad, not really. What I need to do, though, is to intentionally suppress those assumptions so that I can listen at a more deep level and not allow those assumptions to dominate my thinking and to dominate the conclusions that I draw. Also, you need to ask questions. You know, if they are saying something and you're just not clear about what they're saying, or you're not sure you agree, then just say, okay, let me ask for a clarification. Is this what you're saying? Is this the point you're trying to make? But listen without judgment. Now, you can disagree with something and still not be judgmental toward them. See, disagreement is just saying, I don't really agree with that. Judgment is saying, I don't agree with that, and you're a bad person for thinking it or saying it. So that's the big difference. Learn to restate what they say. Or as you get to a point in a conversation, you need to intentionally stop and say, okay, I think I understand what you're saying, and I think it's this. Is that correct? Now, if it's not, then give them the freedom to offer some correction. Say, no, that's kind of it, but not exactly. What you want to do is restate it until you can get them to the point where they're able to say, yes, that's exactly what I was trying to say. They will let you know when you have restated their thoughts correctly. There's more benefits to listening. People are really healed whenever they are heard without judgment. The exchange of truth is curative. You see, if they're allowed, and by truth I don't mean like ultimate truth, but if they're able to be truthful about what's on their hearts and what's on their minds and listen to without judgment, then it has a curative effect on them and I believe on the listener as well, because you're able to connect with that person. Another one of the benefits of truly listening is that you are loving your neighbor when you listen to them. For that matter, you're loving your enemy when you listen to them. And that benefits both of you. Another benefit is that you're going to get information that you need. And that's important because in every person, they've got something to offer. Maybe it's just a small amount. But if you listen, you're going to get information that you need. One of the best examples of the benefits of listening was a young man that I had a chance to have a couple conversations with about 10 or 12 years ago. At that time, the police department had gotten some funding and they were able to give classes to people who were just released from prison with felony convictions. And this young man, 23, 24 years old, the best I recall, and he had just gotten out of the program and was he was very motivated. I could just tell he really sort of stood out from everyone else. He wanted to get this behind him and move on with his life, and he listened to everything I said. And I had been hired because I had done a lot of hiring and employing people in the past, and they wanted me to share with them some tips on how to get an interview and then how to do well in the interview so that they could be hired. And he listened very carefully, and then after it was all over and everybody was gone, he hung around and asked me more questions, and I could tell that he really wanted to move forward in his life, and I felt good about him. And matter of fact, it was within a couple weeks he had landed a job and just jumped into doing the best he could. In fact, I think it was maybe about a month or so after that, he wanted to talk with me a second time because he was so excited about getting his job. And of course, he wanted to share that information and share the things that had been helpful in getting the job. But he also said, I've got these other problems in my life. He said, I've actually got 2 felony convictions and I'm real worried. He said, the second time I got the felony conviction, it was actually a gun charge, but it wasn't because he had a gun. He just happened to be playing poker with some friends. A police raid came in. They found drugs and arrested the man who was the owner of the home. But in that kind of a situation, it's a very unjust law, I think. But because one person in a drug raid had a gun, everybody was charged with a gun crime. So he got caught in that second one. He said, I'm just so worried about getting another conviction, and then it's going to be 3 times and you're out, and I'm going to be in prison for a long time. And he was excited about where he was moving in life. He wanted to make sure he didn't move backwards. So he and I had some good conversations. I tried to give him some information that would help him to be able to recognize dangerous situations, to stay out of them. I also encouraged him, get to know some policemen. I said, that way if you happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time and this policeman recognizes you, he might tell you, I'll get on out of here before they do that. And I found out from a policeman later who I shared that with. He said, we've got discretion, and if we think a guy is a good guy, says we may cut him a break right there. So anyway, Alan really listened. But the most exciting part, about a year later, he called the lady who was in charge of the program with the police department and said, I want you to tell Dana I just got promoted. Here he was, a 2-time felon, but he decided to really listen, not just to me, but to the people he was working with and try to be a really good employee. And within about a year, he got promoted to supervisor. So he went from a 2-time felon to a supervisor in 1 year's time. And it was primarily because he became a good listener. The next thing we need to be slow to speak. Learn to carefully weigh all the information that comes to us. We are flooded with information right now. It comes from all kinds of media and social media, as well as our friends and neighbors. And it's literally a flood of information, but most of it is either misinformation or only partly true. And Scripture tells us even a fool who remains silent is considered wise, and the one who holds his tongue is deemed discerning. Proverbs 10:19 says the one who restrains his word is wise. So Scripture teaches us that if we learn to remain silent, not open our mouths before we really have good information to put out, that we are wise people, or at least we're deemed to be discerning. Proverbs 18:7 also says that the first person to state his case seems right until the opponent begins and starts cross-examining him. So we really need to learn to, whenever we hear information, not to move on that information, not to speak about it, not to act on it until we've gotten all the information that we possibly can. Now, it's impossible to get all the information, but we still need to get as much as we can and make sure that the information we have is as good as it can be before we act on it and before we speak. It's always good to withhold judgment until all the evidence is in. One of the reasons is because it's just sort of the nature of people. Once we make a judgment, we tend to ignore evidence to the contrary. In other words, once we've staked out a position, then we just tend not to listen to anything else. That's just how we are. Once people take a position, it's very difficult to move from that position if the evidence, even if the evidence is strongly contrary to that position. We tend to remember evidence that confirms our judgment, and we tend to ignore contrary information. In fact, there's actually a word for it. It's called confirmation bias. That's why we need to be slow to speak and not commit ourselves early to a position until we're very sure of it. And it begins with thinking through each issue carefully and waiting for any contrary evidence to emerge before we stake out a position or state a position. Also, it tells us to be slow to anger. See, anger tends to end conversation. Being easily offended is often a sign of anger. If you, as a person, are easily offended by things that other people say, you really need to ask yourself, why is it that I'm so easily offended by this information? Why am I offended easily by the positions that others take? What is it about me that gets angry because of things that other people say? So we need to learn to be slow to anger because it makes you a better person. Being slow to anger also is evidence of self-control. Going on in James 1 verse 20, it says, human anger does not accomplish God's righteousness. When we seek to enforce God's ways through human anger, we short-circuit His power. So be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. When we do that, we open up a pathway for God to work in the lives of other people. And that's what we want to do. So be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger. Thank you.